In this video, I want to quickly take a look at how Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown performs on my M2 MacBook Air. So as you can see, I do have the Metal Performance HUD on in the top right. So I am about, currently I would say maybe 2 or 3 hours into the game so far. And as I said, the settings are at their default. I have not adjusted anything. If we go into the display options, we can see we're playing in full screen. The resolution is at 1440. I should also mention that while I am playing this through my M2 MacBook Air with 16 gig of memory, I currently have the MacBook Air plugged into a Dell gaming monitor, which is 1440p. So that might be why it's defaulting to that resolution, not sure. The graphics quality is at normal, and I don't believe any of these other things really matter. There's really not many options when it comes to graphics in this game. Your really only options are the display mode, the resolution, and the graphics quality between normal, high, and ultra. So we're going to leave it at normal for now. We're going to leave the resolution at its maximum, and let's keep an eye on the frame rate as we play around and see how it performs. So currently we can see that the frame rate is a steady 60 FPS, which is great, but just based on some of my experience playing this game, I know that not to be the case all the time. So let's see what happens here.
Hi, Sargon. Lend me your Eye of the Wanderer.
So I've been keeping an eye on the FPS this entire time, and I mean, I don't believe it has dropped below 50, but it definitely has not stayed at a lock 60. That being said, although the frame rate does seem to drop at certain points, you know, if you're in a battle or something, it does seem to kind of, you know, hover between 50 and 60 for the most part. That being said, there seems to be every so often these like dropped frames or this sort of stuttering effect. And I'm not sure why that is. I'm wondering if it's not a GPU related issue. Rather, maybe it's a memory issue. I do have 16 gig of memory on my M2 MacBook Air. However, I am currently recording this with OBS, and OBS does use a meaningful amount of resources, and maybe that is what's causing that little bit of stuttering. But for the most part, it runs really well. Like, as we can see, it does seem to stay at a, I'm not going to say a lock 60, but definitely between 50 and 60 for the most part. And I'm pretty happy with that performance on, you know, an M2. You may start to see a bit more significant drop in performance as the chips heat up. I have not noticed when I play for an hour or so that the performance all of a sudden, you know, starts to get significantly worse. I haven't noticed that. but presumably it does happen. And we can see right there in that little fight sequence there, I mean, there was multiple enemies, there was multiple animations happening, combat animations, and we even see this sort of animated background with quite a few layers back there, and I believe it stayed at a locked 60 FPS that entire time. So if we look at the Metal Performance HUD in the top right, we can see that I am playing this on an M2 based Mac. We can see that it is a resolution of 2560 by 1440. We can see that currently the average FPS is 60. And one of the most interesting aspects of the Metal Performance HUD is that graph at the bottom. And what that graph is showing is not the frames per second, but it's actually showing how long each frame takes to produce. And I believe it's a representation of the number above it, so the frame interval. So we can see there it just changed for a second. So this is how long it takes for each frame to be produced. And if something goes wrong, essentially we will see a spike on that graph, meaning that it took longer for the frame to be produced, and as a result, sometimes a frame gets dropped, or you perceive this as some sort of stutter on the screen, which is what we're seeing in this game every so often. And there are many different reasons why this could happen, but the most common cause, especially on an M series Mac, is memory pressure. So when memory stalls, the GPU waits and then the frame time spikes and you see this sort of dip. Or in the case of that blue line in the graph, we'll see a spike, right? And that's saying that it took longer to produce the frame than previously. And what we want to see is that blue line at the bottom. We want to see that perfectly flat, and we want to see it as low as possible on that graph. That's showing that it is rendering the frames very rapidly and very consistently, right? But whenever we see something where a frame drops or it's taking longer to produce that frame than normal, that's when we see that spike. And we are seeing it semi-frequently in this game while playing on an M2 MacBook Air. If it is memory related, if it is a memory pressure issue, then it's going to be entirely tied to your memory on your Mac. Thankfully, I have 16 gig of memory, which is probably why I don't see it too often, but I am still experiencing it. Now, if I'm right in thinking that it is a memory issue, it's not purely a GPU time-bound issue, then the only thing that you could possibly do is to recover as much memory from your Mac as possible, right? You're trying to eliminate other sources of memory usage on your Mac. And again, I'm currently recording this with OBS, and it is taking up some memory right now. So maybe that is contributing to the issue. But what you cannot do, again, you could test this yourself, but what probably won't improve the situation is to change the resolution. So if you put the resolution down to 1080, for example, if this is a memory issue, this might not do anything at all. And you know what? Let's do that just out of curiosity. So let's see if we still get the stuttering. So we are playing, I believe it's rendering at, I know it says 1440 up at the top there, because that's what we opened the game up in, but it's currently rendering at 1080, and we still have the graphics set to normal, which is as low as it'll go. Let's explore around and see if we can get that stuttering to happen again. So it's still happening. Let me just keep an eye on it again for a minute. Yeah, so it's happening right there. When I first came into this route, and it just happened again right there. So it's still happening, and that tells me that it's likely a memory issue. It is not a GPU specific issue, and that's why we're still seeing the spikes, even though we've lowered the resolution, the render resolution down to 1080. So that's probably not going to make a significant difference. What might make a difference is if we could lower the graphics quality, but we're already playing at the lowest possible option, so there's really nothing we can do here. So all in all, I'm very happy with the performance of this game on my M2 MacBook Air. Even though it isn't like some big open world AAA game, it's still a beautiful looking game. It's still rendering at 1440p. We're still getting, you know, a near locked 60 FPS. I would say it kind of bounces around between 55 and 60. I've never seen it go lower than 50 though. We do get these little stutters every so often, and I have a suspicion that it's probably related to memory. Now, unfortunately, what that means is that anyone who has less than 16 gig of memory on their Mac, they may experience a lot more of this stuttering. And as I just showed, chances are lowering the resolution is not going to make a significant impact. So this game is a game that does require a good amount of memory on the Mac, 16 gig at a minimum, I would say. Any lower than that, you're probably going to see a lot more of that stuttering, unfortunately. But aside from that, the game performs really, really, really well. If you have an M2 or better, you should see really good performance. Again, just keep in mind that you do need to have a good amount of memory. I would say 16 gig minimum. Anyways, that's it for this video. I will see you in the next one. See you later.